The unexpected English teachers of Australia. Have you ever noticed how the biggest changes in life often start with the smallest questions? Now picture this. In quiet Australian suburbs, where gum trees sway gently in the afternoon breeze, something unusual is happening. Inside countless homes, families are logging into Zoom, not to meet local teachers, but to learn English from tutors thousands of kilometers away in the Philippines. Sounds strange, doesn't it? Almost unbelievable. After all, Australia is an English-speaking nation, proud of its language, proud of its education system. So why would Australians look overseas for something that's supposed to be their birthright? Yet it's happening, quietly, steadily, and with surprising emotion. I first heard about it from a friend in Melbourne, a retired accountant. Over coffee, he leaned closer and whispered, "You won't believe this, but my grandson learns better from a Filipino tutor online than from his teacher at school." He said it like a confession, half embarrassed, half amazed. His eyes carried a mix of guilt and gratitude, as though he'd stumbled onto a secret he couldn't quite explain. And I remember thinking, there's a bigger story here. A few weeks later, I listened in on one of those lessons. I expected grammar drills, maybe some strict correction, but what I heard instead stopped me in my tracks. Laughter. Gentle, sincere laughter, the kind that breaks tension and fills a room with light. A 10-year-old boy stumbled over a word. Instead of scolding him, the tutor smiled and said softly, "It's okay. Let's try again together." The boy grinned. He tried again, and he got it right. In that moment, I understood something simple but profound. Sometimes learning isn't about rules. It's about warmth. It's about how safe a teacher makes you feel when you're afraid to get it wrong. That moment was my micro-shock. The first glimpse into why so many Australians are now turning to Filipino tutors. Unquote. One of those families is Sarah and her daughter, Emily, from Sydney. Sarah is a single mother in her 40s, hardworking, hopeful, and often exhausted. Her daughter, Emily, is bright and curious, but painfully shy. She loves reading, but freezes up whenever she's asked to speak in class. Teachers tried their best, but in big classrooms, Emily's voice was too small to be heard. Nights were the hardest. Sarah would find her daughter sitting silently in her room, dreading another day of presentations and whispers. Out of desperation, Sarah searched online and stumbled upon the world of Filipino English tutors. At first, she was doubtful. Could someone halfway across the ocean, with a different accent and culture, really help her child? But on Emily's very first session, something shifted. Her tutor, Grace, a young woman from Cebu, shared a funny story about mispronouncing an English word when she was a student. Emily laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. And in that laughter, something opened. For the first time, Emily spoke freely. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence. It was as if years of fear began to melt away. Later, Sarah told me, her voice trembling, "I cried, because I saw my daughter speak without fear." Do you know what that means to a mother? That was her micro-shock. The moment her world shifted. It wasn't just about price, though Filipino tutors are indeed more affordable. It wasn't just about convenience, though flexible hours made life easier. It was something deeper, a connection, a feeling of being seen, understood, and guided with kindness. And Sarah isn't alone. Across Australia, in living rooms from Perth to Brisbane, families are telling similar stories of tutors who not only teach, but care. One of them is David, a retired engineer. After decades working with numbers and machines, he wanted to improve his English for volunteer work. He signed up for lessons with Liza, a Filipino tutor. He expected rigid correction and grammar drills. But what he got was laughter, conversation, and gentle encouragement. Week after week, he began to speak more clearly, more confidently. And one day he said something simple but powerful. "I used to think I was bad with words. Turns out I just needed someone who believed I could find them." That's the real story here. Not just education, but empathy. Not just affordability, but connection. Millions of Australians are discovering that learning English, even in an English-speaking nation, isn't just about mastering a language. It's about rediscovering trust. Trust in the process. Trust in the person guiding you. Trust that kindness can be more powerful than correction. And maybe that's the real lesson. One that goes far beyond words. Because in a world that's more connected than ever, perhaps the greatest bridge between people isn't technology or language, but the simple act of teaching with heart. What David got from his lessons wasn't what he expected. Liza didn't just teach him English. She listened to him. She asked about his childhood, his career, the machines he once built, the towns he'd seen across Australia. She made him feel that his stories mattered, that his voice was worth hearing. Later, David told me, "She didn't just correct me, she cared." And that care made me want to keep speaking, even when I stumbled. He was 72 years old, yet he spoke with more confidence than he ever had at 40. That change didn't come from a textbook. It came from connection, from one human being on a screen who truly listened. Then came the question, so why Filipinos? The answer begins in history. For more than a century, the Philippines has carried English not as a foreign language, but as a lifelong companion. Generations grew up moving between Filipino languages and English with ease, learning not just to translate words, but feelings. This gift, this ability to shift tone, to sense emotion, to meet people where they are, has quietly become the heart of their teaching. For Australians, that adaptability creates something special, a kind of learning that feels less like a class and more like a conversation, less about grammar, more about trust. Technology helped make this possible. A decade ago, this connection would have been awkward. Bad internet, glitchy calls, long delays. But now, a student in Sydney can log in, and within seconds, they're face-to-face with a tutor in Cebu or Davao. And what happens across that screen is more than instruction. It's the meeting of two cultures, two hearts. Because while the internet built the bridge, it's trust that keeps people crossing it. In a world where learning can feel rushed and mechanical, Filipino tutors have carved out something rare, a space where trust comes first. Parents trust them with their children's fragile confidence. Adults trust them with their insecurities, the words they've always been afraid to say out loud. And that trust quietly changes lives. Sarah saw it in her daughter Emily. Weeks after starting lessons with Grace, Emily raised her hand in class for the first time. It was only a short paragraph she read aloud, but to her, it felt like climbing a mountain. That night, she whispered to her mother, "Grace told me I could do it, so I did." Those words, simple, small, carried more meaning than any test score. They revealed the heart of it all. Filipino tutors don't just teach English. They help people believe in themselves again. And it's not just children or retirees. Across Australia, Professionals, nurses, business owners, and new migrants are turning to Filipino tutors, not only to polish their English, but to rediscover confidence. A nurse in Brisbane told me she chose a Filipino tutor because she understands what it means to care for someone. Their sessions became more than lessons. They became conversations. She said, "For the first time, I felt seen, not judged." This quiet movement is no longer so quiet. Schools have started to notice. Some language centers now recommend Filipino tutors as partners in learning. Even companies are exploring collaborations, using Filipino coaches to train employees in empathy, communication, and customer service. What began as a personal choice is turning into a cultural shift. And as with all change, there is resistance. Some see it as a threat, an erosion of local opportunity, a questioning of national pride. But perhaps that misses the point. This isn't about rejection. It's about recognition. Recognition that in a globalized world, talent doesn't live inside borders, and excellence doesn't speak with just one accent. Australians aren't turning away from their own teachers. They're opening their hearts to others, to something different, something needed, something human. Because this story isn't really about learning English. It's about connection. It's about dignity. It's about finding the courage to speak and be heard. When a shy girl like Emily finds her voice, when a retiree like David feels young again, when a nurse discovers pride in her words, these are not small moments. They're quiet revolutions. Transformations made possible by trust, between two cultures, bound not by geography, but by care. In a note-ending parentheses, if you ask Sarah today what surprised her most, she doesn't talk about grammar or grades. She talks about Grace, the tutor who became almost family. What began as a practical decision, an affordable choice, slowly blossomed into a friendship that crossed oceans. One evening, Sarah overheard Emily laughing during her lesson. Curious, she asked, "What's so funny?" Emily grinned and explained. "Grace told me about something called bayanihan. It's when neighbors come together to help each other, sometimes even carrying a whole house to a new place." Sarah smiled, touched. "Can you imagine, Mom?" Emily said. "People lifting a whole house together? I think that's beautiful." And in that moment, Sarah realized something. Her daughter wasn't just learning English. Selected. She was learning kindness. She was learning about another culture, one built on compassion and community. And that's what's really happening here. Every lesson is a small window into another world. Through those windows, understanding flows both ways. David, the retired engineer, once thought of the Philippines as just a vacation spot. Beaches, palm trees, postcards. Then one day, Lisa told him about the typhoons that hit her hometown, the nights of flooding, the way her community rebuilt together. David was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know." A week later, he donated to a small relief fund in her town. That's what this movement is creating. Not just better speakers, but better listeners. It's reshaping how Australians see others, and maybe how they see themselves. Because when two voices meet across an ocean and choose to understand each other, it's no longer just a lesson. It's a bridge made not of technology or grammar, but of trust, warmth, and the human heart. It wasn't charity, he said. It was solidarity. And that word, solidarity, carried more weight than I expected. Because what's happening between Australians and Filipino tutors isn't a business trend. It's something far more human. Every lesson, every laugh, every small misunderstanding has become a bridge between two worlds. Australians aren't just hiring teachers. They're inviting voices, stories, and cultures into their homes. And in return, Filipinos are learning about Australia, its humor, its slang, its little quirks that don't exist anywhere else. Grace once told me how she and her student Emily laughed for 10 minutes straight trying to say the word arvo, Australian slang for afternoon. Grace's Filipino accent wrapped around it like a song, and both of them burst out laughing. That laughter crossed oceans. It wasn't just sound, it was connection. Of course, not every moment is easy. Sometimes accents clash. Sometimes jokes don't land. Sometimes frustration sneaks in. But that's where the real learning begins. Because respect doesn't grow from perfection. It grows from persistence, from staying in the conversation even when it feels awkward. Andrew, a father in Brisbane, once told me about his son who struggled to understand his Filipino tutor at first. "Dad," the boy said, "she sounds different." Andrew worried he'd made a mistake. But weeks later, his son said something that changed everything. "Dad, I think I understand her better than my teacher now." That's when Andrew realized his son had learned something bigger than English. He'd learned how to listen. Truly listen. And that's a skill that will last him a lifetime. In a world where we often rush to correct what's different, these tutoring relationships are teaching something radical: empathy. For the tutors, the change runs just as deep. Grace told me once, "When Emily speaks, I feel proud. It's like watching a flower bloom." Liza, another tutor, said she loved hearing her student David talk about his engineering projects. "I learned so much," she said. "I didn't know machines could be so interesting." It made me realize how much knowledge we share when we truly talk to each other. These aren't small moments. They're seeds of understanding, planted quietly across borders. And as they grow, they're changing old ideas about who gets to teach, who gets to lead, and who holds the power of knowledge. Australians are discovering that great teachers don't need to sound like them or live near them. Filipinos are realizing that their voices, the same voices once overlooked, now carry weight and meaning across oceans. Parents. Some Australian communities have even begun hosting Meet the Tutor nights online. Parents join in, kids wave at their tutors through the screen, and conversations spill beyond lessons into food and music and stories. Someone always asks about adobo or sinigang. Someone else explains cricket or barbecue traditions. And somewhere in that laughter and curiosity, stereotypes quietly fall apart. Because once you've laughed with someone, once you've shared stories and listened, really listened, it becomes impossible to see them as a label. Suddenly, the world feels smaller, kinder, more connected. And that matters. Because in an age where people feel more divided than ever, these tiny, ordinary moments are creating something extraordinary: trust. Australians who once thought of English as a subject are beginning to see it as a shared experience. They're showing their children that learning doesn't have to come from authority. It can come from humility. That sometimes the best teacher might come from halfway across the world. And for the tutors, this work has become more than teaching. They are bridge builders, carriers of warmth, messengers of resilience. Each class becomes a story exchanged. Each mistake becomes a lesson in grace. Each laugh becomes a bond that no algorithm or app could ever create. They are rewriting what it means to be a teacher in this century. Because the future of education won't be defined by who has the best grammar drills or flashiest technology. It will be defined by who can make learning human, who can build confidence, who can create a space safe enough for someone to stumble, and brave enough for them to rise again. And in that sense, Filipino tutors have become quiet pioneers. They remind us that teaching is not about perfection, it's about connection. Maybe that's why so many Australians now prefer Filipino English tutors. Not because they speak flawless English, but because they speak with heart. And perhaps that's the real lesson. That wisdom has no borders. That kindness is a kind of intelligence. That listening is just as powerful as speaking. Maybe the next chapter will see even more schools integrating Filipino tutors, communities partnering across nations, Australians teaching in return, sharing their own stories and skills in a circle of learning that never ends. But even if that future takes time, the seeds are already planted. The children who grow up with these tutors will carry their influence for life. The adults who found their voice later in life will remember the person from Cebu or Manila who helped them believe in themselves again. And those ripples, those quiet, human ripples, will outlast every Zoom call, every screen, every border. Because at the heart of it all lies a truth as old as humanity. We grow when we learn from each other. We heal when we listen. We rise when we choose connection over separation. That's why this story matters. It's not just about language. It's about people. About two nations, learning to see each other, and in doing so, rediscovering what it means to be human.